It's good to be here. It was a pretty hectic morning trying to get up here from Melbourne this morning, so I'm glad I'm actually here. So that's great, and good to see so many people here today. Um, so I'm a visual artist, and I'm also a conservator. I trained at RMIT in Melbourne. I did a fine art ceramics degree, and then I went to the UK. Oh, can you all hear me, by the way? Can you all hear me all right? Yep. Went to the UK and studied ceramics and glass conservation at Westdean College, which is a specialist college over there, and then worked in London for a couple of years for specialist conservation firms before coming back to Australia, and worked as a conservator in various institutions in Victoria, National Gallery Victoria, Museum Victoria, State Library, Heritage Victoria. And then I went freelancing as a conservator, specialist ceramics conservator in 2000. And then my art has sort of come from the conservation practice, and I'll explain how as I go along today. But what I thought I'd do to start is just show you some of the ceramics conservation jobs that I've done, and you can see the sorts of skills that I've got. And the skills and techniques that I use in ceramics conservation I use in my art practice as well. So this first slide is from the University of Melbourne Classics collection. It's an ancient Greek terracotta figure, and you can see quite badly broken. And there it is, fully restored. So basically the process of conservation is to stick back together all the broken pieces, fill in any missing chips, but don't do any retouching or replicating to try and make the piece look like it's invisible. So you can see up the top, you can see that the crack is filled but not painted. So that's what conservation is. Then you get to restoration, which is basically fully restoring a broken object. So the object, when you're restoring it, you want it to look as though it's never been broken before. So so that's how smashed it was. This is a tiny little candelabra. It's probably only about this big, probably 10 centimetres high. And there it is all back together at the bottom. The top slide is what I've done is I've taken a mould of some of the missing areas and recreated those missing areas with epoxy resin and epoxy putty, and then painted the surface to replicate the glaze so that when you look at it, you can't tell that it's been repaired. I mean, I can always see my restoration work, but to an untrained eye, you won't be able to tell that it's been restored.
So you don't replicate those broken bits in porcelain?
No, so when you're doing conservation and restoration of ceramics, there's no remaking of any of the ceramics or refiring of the ceramics. It's all synthetic materials. So it's polyester resins, epoxy resins, and different paint mediums, gouache paint, acrylic paint, other paints with powder pigments. So it's all synthetic, what I'm doing. This is a shepherdess. She was missing an arm, or she had a broken arm, and she was missing a sheep. So I had to recreate the sheep. You can see quite a process. I had to model it in plasticine first, and then take a mould from that, and then cast it in dental plaster, and then again retouched it and painted it to replicate the original. So that required a bit of research. I needed to look in some books to find copies of what the sheep would look like, and had to make sure that it was, looking like the right sort of sheep for that figurine. And there she is, all finished with her new little sheep. This is Romeo and Juliet. So this is a Staffordshire figurine. Romeo's lost his head. More ways than one. And so there he is at the top slide. I've remade the head. With Staffordshire figurines, the way they're modelled is quite basic. There's not a lot of detail in the actual modelling of the ceramic. The detail is in the painting afterwards. So I had to sort of replicate that kind of simple modelling at the top, and then put the eyes and the nose and all the detail in the actual painting part of the process. I don't only restore ceramics. When I'm working as a conservator, I'm called an objects conservator. So within conservation, you get different disciplines within conservation. So you've got specialists in painting conservation, paper conservation, and objects conservation. So an objects conservator will actually conserve all sorts of different materials, including this emu egg. So a builder apparently knocked it off a shelf, so there it is back together, and it was missing a whole lot of pieces, so I've had to actually recreate some of those bits. You can see those white areas are the filled areas that I've had to recreate, and there's the other side of it. It's a bit like doing a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle, this, because it was quite a tricky job, and there it is all finished. So quite a good result, I have to say. I was very pleased with that. Very tricky, hard to do. But so they're the sorts of skills that I've got as a conservator. And this is just a shot of my studio, and I've got that sign up there. It'll become quite obvious why I've got that sign. I don't sort of say much to my conservation clients about my artwork, although as I've become more well known, my conservation clients do know what I do within the art world now, and they're quite fascinated. But when I was initially doing the art, I did try and keep it quiet, because I am often destroying objects and ceramics to recreate them, and it's kind of, you know, back to front to what I should be doing as a conservator. So, so this is the first work that I ever made. It's called Murder on the Dance Floor. I'll say a few things about this. The first is the slide. I just want to be very clear. It's a really terrible photo, and it's got really rotten tissue paper at the back. And I don't even know what I was thinking, why I would put a background like that, you know, in an artwork. But for me, this was the first artwork I'd ever made, and it was enough that I even managed to photograph it, let alone think about a professional photographer. But because you're all students, I just wanted to take an opportunity today to say to you that one of the things that's became pretty apparent to me really early on in my career was the importance of documenting your work as professionally as you can. So if that means taking the best photos that you can take, that's great. But if you can actually afford a professional photographer, that's even better. Because as I go along and you see some of the photos of my works, once I start to have the works photographed professionally, they just look so much better, and it just does you a really great service in presenting your art when you're entering competitions or prizes or going for funding, to actually present your art in the best way you can. So, so having said that, this artwork is quite macabre and bizarre, and I want to make it clear that I'm not actually necessarily a brutal person, but my studio in Collingwood is in Easy Street, and back in the 1970s, two women were murdered in Easy Street, and they didn't ever find out who killed these women. It was really a brutal murder. There was a little kid who was left in the house, and they found her later. And these days I know murders happen, and we're probably more used to hearing about them in the news, but back then no one really, it was a real shock. And so the Easy Street murders have become a bit of a Melbourne urban myth. And so when I say my studio's in Easy Street, often Melbourne people will say, ooh, Easy Street, you know, they're kind of like, they know about the murders. So back in 2005, we had a Melbourne Fringe Festival exhibition at my studio, and the theme was Murder on Easy Street. And at the time I wasn't making any artwork, I was working as a conservator, but I thought that I could actually make an artwork with a theme to do with murder, and I had this ballerina figurine in my studio and other broken figurines, and so I thought of the Sophie Ellis-Bextor song, It's Murder on the Dance Floor, and I thought, well, I know one ballerina can murder another ballerina. So that's kind of how this all started. It was just this sort of innocent thought about the theme of murder, and that's what started the process. So it really freaked me out when I first put that first bit of blood on, I have to say, because that's just the broken head of the figurine, but it does look real, I have to admit. So yeah, I was quite freaked out, but people people responded very well to it. So there she is in all her glory, very, very happy with what she's done. So that's what started my art career. I got a really good response to that, and was lucky enough to be picked up by a commercial gallery pretty early on as well. And so what it's allowed me to do is just to continue on and start to really play with this idea of using my conservation skills, the same materials, the same studio, the same techniques, the same tools, to then work with figurines and look at social and political issues that concern me. There she is, looking very pleased. And so that's what's sort of springboarded me to then start my art career, which really, I guess, began in about 2006, so about 6 years ago now. So this work was when David Hicks was still in Guantanamo Bay, and it's called In the Land of the Free. They call him a terrorist, but at home he was just a little hick. So here he is in his Guantanamo Bay orange jumpsuit. And again, this is a photo I took myself, but obviously I'm getting a bit better at my record keeping. This is called H5N1, so that's when the bird flu was in the news, again in about 2006. So the bird flu that could go between chickens and people. So I've made this little epoxy resin gas mask and got these little chickens from eBay and combined them to make this artwork. There we go.
What's the vintage of the original figurine?
So this figurine is probably from about 1950, 1960. So these sorts of figurines you find in op shops for $2, $3. This little figure group here cost, I think, about $15. So quite an expensive one. But they were mass produced after the Second World War. First of all in Japan, then in Taiwan. More recently in Hong Kong and even now in China. So what these figurines are doing is they're replicating the really good quality Meissen 18th century figurines, but they're just mass produced. And through the mass production, they become really kitsch and really kind of ugly. And so I kind of play on that kitsch aesthetic, I guess, and use that to my advantage. So this one's called Rose Was Playing Like a Real Dog. So what I've done is I've stuck a dog's head on Rose's head, and that's a shot of me working on it in the studio. So you can see I'm kind of just painting out the join between the dog's head and the lace to get it nice and neat. And there's Rose with her little eyelashes and beauty spot. So the thing, what I find is I can do anything I want with my skills to make these figurines look the way I want them to. And that's how I sign my work. So I always sign it on the bottom of the figurines, because figurines, in the history of figurine making, figurines are always signed or stamped by the makers on the bottom. So I'm just sort of adding to that process. This work was when the Iraq War was just starting. It's called George and Laura Were All Set to Shock and Awe. So it was when the Americans were going into Baghdad and they were going to blow Baghdad to bits, which they did. So these, I've used vintage Action Man accessories that I've got from eBay. So they're little helmets and guns that kind of fit the scale of the figurines, and then I've painted the camouflage colours on. I got these little dolls quite cheaply in a Cheap as Chips shop, and they're porcelain, and I thought I could do something interesting with that. And at the time on the telly, there was a TV show, Nip Tuck, which was all about plastic surgery. And so I was thinking about the Nip Tuck show and women and plastic surgery, but also the Three Graces, which are sort of ubiquitous in art history. They're always shown, these three women usually dancing around together. So this is my version of the Three Graces Nip Tuck. So I've made the first one, I've given her quite broad hips, and she's all marked up ready to have her plastic surgery. The middle ones, of course, had it done, and the one on the ends had the final sort of result. So I'm interested in that. So I've got another work coming up that I've also expanding on this idea, I guess. This is another in the war series, and it's another George and Laura one. I put this in. I just sort of tracked the Iraq War as it continued. I put this one in just to show you the back of the figurine. So often I don't paint the back in the way that I paint the front, and it's not that I'm being lazy. I mean, I could paint the back if I wanted, but again, in ceramics history, there's a strong tradition of not painting the backs, and that's because they were mass produced, and particularly Staffordshire figurines, if you look at them, the backs are usually white because it just was quicker for the manufacturers to only paint the front. So often I'll do that too, and it's not a good or a bad thing. It's just something that I do. If people are aware of it, that's good. If they're not, it doesn't matter. But it's just I do kind of add a few sort of historical things into what I do for people who may understand them. This one's playing on Well, it's called Saint Sebastian was feeling really blue boy. So Saint Sebastian in art history, I'm sure you've seen images of him, was martyred by having arrows stuck into him, and the blue boy is a famous image from English art. But to be honest, I really was just interested in trying to see if I could stick these great big copper nails into the figurine, because they were really cool nails. They were about, I don't know, 10 centimetres long. I found them in my hardware shop, and I was just thinking, what can I do with these nails? So I had some fun with that. It was quite difficult to actually drill the holes to get the nails in, because this is hard paste porcelain, so I don't know how many ceramics people we've got in here today, but hard paste porcelain is the hardest ceramic that you can get. It's almost like stone. So I ruined a whole lot of diamond drills trying to drill the holes for this one. This one is called Fun and Games in Abu Ghraib. It's when the Abu Ghraib prisoner abuse scandal was happening in Iraq. And I got this piece on eBay, and I found a figurine. I saw it on eBay, and I just thought, that's just bizarre. It was already a little boy sitting on the back of another little boy, hitting him with a truncheon. So I didn't really need to do much to it, but I've made him into a soldier and given him some guns and things. But sometimes I see a figurine and I just buy it because I know that it's bizarre and I can do something with it. In this case, this work came because I just thought the figurine was fascinating. Other times, I'll have an idea for a work and I'll actually buy figurines specifically for that work. Like these ones. These are Guantanamo Bay souvenirs. So I was imagining that if, it's again when Guantanamo Bay was in the news, that there's a history within ceramics of making souvenirs that you get when you've been on holiday. So you might go to Brighton in England and get a little souvenir and it says Brighton down the bottom. So I'm kind of continuing that tradition and imagining if you could actually get a souvenir from Guantanamo Bay, what might it look like? So these are the little blue and white cheap figurines from op shops that were all sort of $2 each. So I bought them all together. And then I've got one little soldier and a whole lot of little figurines with chains with Guantanamo Bay written around the base. I'm mindful of the time. I've already, haven't got much more time, so I'll just have to keep. I've got lots of slides, so I'll just keep jumping through. This is called shark fin soup. So this work, I saw something on the telly, and they were actually shark fishing and cutting off the fins and throwing the live sharks back into the water, and they couldn't swim and they were dying, and I was just very upset by that. So I got online and searched for shark figurines specifically to make this work. And actually, this was interesting. One of them was on eBay, and it was from Russia. It's Losmanov porcelain, and the note said rare Losmanov porcelain shark figurine, very, very expensive, and so I emailed, do you have more than one? Oh yes, how many would you like? So I said, well, maybe 4, that might be good. So beware on eBay, if it says rare, it may not be. That's a shot of my studio. So I have a lot of figurines around and I just play around with ideas, and I've got my Action Man accessories and I just, play with what might fit. That's a shot of my paints. I use a clear paint medium which I use for the restoration of ceramics, but I add powder pigments to that clear medium to make whatever colour I want. And so, as you can see, that's my little pigment selection, and then I just take my pick of what colours I want. And in the back there is a desktop fume hood, so it actually extracts any of the chemical fumes into a actual just an extraction unit underneath the desk. And it's important to have as many things like that to sort of help with occupational health and safety as you can, because the chemicals can be quite nasty in any artwork that you do, not necessarily just conservation, but painting and ceramics, that sort of thing. That's another shot of my studio. This one's called She Had Blood on Her Hands. This is, there was a thing in the news about anti-fur PETA, you know, the group PETA, and they're saying people shouldn't wear fur. And I think it's interesting now you sort of notice that vintage fur has come back, and it seems to be okay now to be wearing vintage fur again. Somehow it seems to sort of slip through, and if it's already been killed, then people are thinking maybe that's all right to use. So this piece is kind of talking about that, I guess. I've actually used vintage fur on the piece, so I'm not sure where I sit within the discussion on it, because it is real fur that I've used. The woman who bought this, it's interesting. Here am I. I'm trying to make this statement about, you know, being anti fur and all the rest, and she bought it because she liked the figurine, because she had one like that as a kid. So sometimes you never really know where your artwork's going to end up, and you can do your best to make, you know, quite a political work, and people then get whatever they want out of your work once it leaves the studio. It's been interesting to see how people respond to my work. This work's called How Much Can a Polar Bear? So I saw some footage of polar bears in the Arctic. Because the ice is melting up there so quickly, usually polar bears can swim for a short distance and then they can get back onto ice, and, you know, they hunt the seals. But these days there's so many gaps in the ice that often polar bears are having to swim so far that they actually, by the time they reach a piece of ice, they're so exhausted that they can't hunt, and they're starving to death. And I found that quite horrific to hear that. And I was thinking, how could I save the polar bears? And so this is my tiny little attempt, you know. So I've given him mask and flippers to help him try and get to the other side of the ice. This is called EI, so similar to the H5N1. This was the equine influenza, when horses were getting that, and that there was worry that it could that people could actually contract it as well. This one is called Oil Junkie, and there was a lot of discussion after the Iraq War that perhaps there weren't weapons of mass destruction at all in Iraq, and in fact the whole war was about oil. So I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what this work's suggesting, I guess, that America is addicted to oil, and that they've gone into Iraq to try and shore up their oil supply. So that's a detail of that work. You can see the soldiers holding a playing card with Saddam Hussein on it. I found it fascinating that the soldiers, when they went into Iraq, were given playing cards, because a lot of the time during war you're not actually fighting. There's a lot of sitting around and waiting, and, you know, the soldiers just sit around and play cards. So what they did was they made these packs of cards with Iraq's most wanted people on the cards, so that when you were playing them you actually saw the faces of the people that you were hunting, so that Saddam Hussein, of course, was the highest rated card. So you can buy these cards on eBay, these packs of cards. So I thought that was quite interesting. This is called Sarah Palin Hockey Mum. So that's when Sarah Palin was in the news, when she was running as the vice presidential candidate in the last election. Interesting that she's kind of back in the news again. So she was saying she was a hockey mum, and she was, you know, all this, but she was actually loved to go moose hunting as well. So there she is. So I don't only use ceramics. I'll use Barbie dolls. I'll use Action Man. I'll use, you know, other found materials in my work. This one's called Ship of Fools, and it was when the discussion around climate change a few years ago was all about sea level rises, and the worry that, you know, when the sea level rises from the melting of the ice caps, that you know, we're going to have these climate refugees where people are going to have to flee their homes, and in fact it is happening in places like Tuvalu and some of the other Pacific islands, where the sea level has got to a point that people can't live there anymore. So this work was about that. So I'm imagining everybody's piled onto this tiny little boat, and what I did was I wrote everything I could think of about climate change, all the things that were relevant at the time about climate change, and it's interesting that the debate since then has moved on, and when I read the particular words, like there's the ICCP report and things like that just aren't in the news anymore, but back then they were. So when I'm making my work, it's always politically relevant to the time that I'm making it. But what I find, of course, is that after a period of time has passed, those issues are not in the news anymore, and so the pieces become more like historical references and have their own sort of interest, I guess, that continues on with them. This is a good case in point. So this piece I made when Kevin Rudd made the apology to the Stolen Generations. It's called Mission Statement Sorry. And it was right at the time when he was about to make the apology that I started making this work. And then he made the apology as I was making the work. And so the apology has now come and gone, but this work still stays, and it's my way of sort of taking part in that dialogue and saying that I'm sorry as well. This is the continuation of my war series. So I was doing these George and Laura pieces about the war in Iraq, but then the war moved to Afghanistan, and then it became the War on Terror. And so what this work is called is the War on Terror Waltz. And so what I'm saying, I guess, is that the War on Terror is like a waltz between the two warring sides. It's not something that can ever really end. It's not a war that can be won, I don't think. It's just going to be like this dance, and it's just going to go on and on. Hopefully it will end, but I'm not really sure. Interestingly, the medal that this figurine's wearing, I got again from eBay, but it's a Global War on Terrorism Service Medal. And I didn't actually realise that the War on Terror was an actual war that you could get a medal for, but you can. And so these medals are awarded to American servicemen and women when they fight in Afghanistan or Iran or wherever, Iraq. But interesting, again, you can buy them on eBay. So there you go. That's the real thing. But I got it for $20 on eBay. So I don't know what that says about the war necessarily. But just an interesting aside, I guess. This one was when Alexander Downer was made a special envoy to the UN for Cyprus. So it's Alexander was thrilled, Cyprus, here I come. And I don't know if many of you remember, but Alexander Downer was famously photographed wearing fishnet stockings. And so I've just had to play around with the ballerina figurine and added the fishnet stockings for that work. This piece is called Belarus Bride, and it came about because I was working as a conservator, conserving an artwork in Melbourne in Fitzroy Gardens, and these two nuns came along, and they had these really weird kind of amazing kind of old-fashioned nun kind of habits on, and I asked where they were from, and they were from Belarus, and we talked for a little bit. They didn't speak much English, and I went back home that night to just look up Belarus because I realised I didn't know really anything about Belarus, and it turns out it's one of the last dictatorships in Europe. And when I did a Google search for Belarus, I wanted to find out about the nuns and their history and everything, but all that came up were all these websites for brides, for women wanting to marry Western men and to leave Belarus. And it took sort of 3 or 4 pages into Google to actually find anything about the history of Belarus. And so this work, I guess, is kind of, it came out of that, the blank eyes, that she's wanting to leave Belarus and she's a Belarus bride. This one's called Banker Joker Wanker, and it's when the financial crash happened in 2000 and started around 2008, and he's dressed as the Joker from Batman, and he's got all these golden eggs in one basket. So they're actually real bantam eggs from my dad, so I had a lot of fun blowing those and then spraying them gold. And there we go. This one's called Olé. This came about because I heard a news report that Catalan in the north of Spain had banned bullfighting. And I was thinking, well, what are the matadors going to fight now if they can't fight bulls? And it was one of those things where I walked around my studio and there's this little elephant figurine sitting there, and I thought, well, maybe he could fight the elephant. And when I stuck the the swords into the elephant, it just looked so sad and tragic, and it just made me think. It's interesting with bullfighting when you see the imagery of bullfighting, and I don't know, I'm so used to that imagery of bullfighting that I just see the bull and see the matador, you see the swords and you see the blood, and then they kill the bull, and I kind of guess I was a bit kind of just not so put off by it, I suppose, because I'm so used to that imagery. But once I stabbed a little elephant, I guess I kind of it just brought it home to me maybe how macabre and sick it really is, and I'm very glad that the bullfighting has been banned up there. This work is quite a large work. It's called The Four Horsemen of the 21st Century Apocalypse. So I was thinking about the book of Revelation in the Bible and the apocalypse, and the four horsemen come at the end of the world. And I was thinking, well, at the 21st century, what are the main issues that are... Because the four horsemen in the book of Revelation were, I don't know, war and famine and pestilence and something else. So I was thinking, what could be the four major issues facing humanity in the 21st century? Because we do hear sort of stories of doom and gloom in the end of the world. So the four horsemen are food scarcity, peak oil, overpopulation, and water scarcity. So they're quite large. They're about this big, I guess. The horses are from China. They're replica Tang figurines, and then I've got the action man bodies and dolls' heads. This is the food horse. It's got rice and lentils and corn and beans stuck all over it. So it took absolutely hours to do. It's one of those things where you have this great idea, and then actually having to do it drives you nearly insane, because I tell you what, it was very fiddly. This is the oil horse. So I went crazy at my hardware shop and bought all these fun things, just various bits of metal and screws and stuff, and so he's got oil all dribbling out of him. There's a detail of him. That's the people horse, so overpopulation. So I got a lot of figurines from eBay and stuck them all over. There's the figurines. And this is the water horse, and with the glasses stuck on the head. Had a lot of fun making these, as you can see. That's a close-up. So I actually drilled a hole in the neck, and it's got a tap coming out of its neck, and it's holding a plug in its mouth, and it's actually got broken windscreen glass as a mosaic all over its body to make it look more like water. Having my studio in Collingwood, often you'll find smashed car windows because it's a bit of a rough area, so I just took my dustpan and brush out one morning and swept up the glass and used it in my artwork. So you never know where you can find materials for artwork if you're prepared to look around, and there's no right or wrong. If you think that windscreen glass is going to be okay, go for it. This is called Broken Hearted, and this work I made on the 7th anniversary of 9/11. It was in the news again, and they hadn't been talking about 9/11 for quite a while, and suddenly there were images on the telly again of the Twin Towers, and it made me realise that I was still, broken-hearted by what had happened, and so I guess I made this work in response to that. And so you've got the planes crashing into the figurines. It was quite a difficult work to make, and I really wanted the smoke to be coming out of the planes, and I actually ended up using steel wool, which I was very pleased with in the end, and it actually worked quite well. This piece is called Mercury Rising, and I don't know if you've seen the documentary The Cove. It's about a cove in Japan where the Japanese fishermen actually herd dolphins and then they slaughter them, and it's a mass slaughter every year. And these documentary filmmakers went in and actually filmed the process and alerted the world to what's going on. But the reason this work's called Mercury Rising is because the Japanese eat the dolphin meat, and the dolphins are at the top of the food chain, and they've got mercury in their systems from all the fish that they've eaten, and so the Japanese who eat the dolphins end up with mercury poisoning, and so it's quite a sort of strange cycle that's going on over there. And used Japanese manga figurines again from eBay to make this work. And I just put this in to show you how I pack my work. I get my work professionally packed by people I worked with at Museum Victoria, because I found, you know, it's all very well to spend all this time making the artwork, and it's so fragile, but then once it leaves my studio, I don't know where it's going to end up and who's going to be handling it. And often people who are handling it in the art industry are not specialist art handlers. And so I want to make the process of working with my art as easy as possible. So these boxes, basically you just literally, it's a drop front box, so that's the front of it there. It literally just, the front just comes up and it's held in place with Velcro. And all it means is that the work is literally slid into the box, and then you just shut the box. And so what it means is I can be quite confident that my work can be transported all over the place, and it is. I live in Melbourne, my gallery is in Sydney, I'm in exhibitions all over Australia, and so what it means is the work can just be easily transported, easily handled, and so it's an investment in the future of my art. It's expensive for me at the time, but it's actually worth it in the end, I find. This piece is called 5 Minutes to Midnight, and it's about the nuclear threat. And I know we don't sort of hear about much of that in the news at the moment, but they're a group of scientists and they've got a website, and they track how close humanity is to being totally annihilated, I guess. And currently the clock is set at 5 minutes to midnight. I think it got to 1 minute to midnight during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it's currently sitting at 5 minutes. So that's just their kind of way of saying that threat is still there and it's still an issue. This one's called Greenwash Warrior Rides In to Save the Planet. So I've gone pretty crazy with this one. I've went to my hardware store and got everything I could find that was green, and just stuck it all over this little guy. Because I don't know if you've heard of the term greenwashing. It's kind of like whitewashing. So it's like a cover-up, but it's kind of covering up with greenwashing or green paint. So a lot of companies these days, they might use this particular green. It's this, you've probably seen it in ads. It's this really bright green, and car companies will use it, or banks will use it, but they're wanting to sort of seem like they're environmentally friendly, when maybe they're not, and maybe it's just their way of trying to seem environmentally sound. And so a term has been coined, and it's called greenwashing. And so basically what I'm saying is this guy's greenwash warrior, riding in, and he's going to just spray everything green, and you know, everything's going to be okay. That's my kind of cynical view about greenwashing, I guess. This one's called Where's My Vote? This came about after the uprisings in Iran a few years ago, when people were protesting and getting shot in the street, and this woman was actually shot in the neck, and someone filmed her dying on their mobile phone, and this work came about sort of as a response to that. Actually, I might be relevant to mention now, but this work is currently in an exhibition at the Museum of Australian Democracy here at Old Parliament House, and that exhibition is in their Living Democracy section of the museum, and it's been extended till November. So if any of you are keen to go and actually have a look at the real thing with my work, then I think there are about 15 pieces in that exhibition. And they chose me because they wanted to show some political art at the museum, and they hadn't done that before. So it was a chance to get a whole group of work together and have an exhibition. And this work is also in the Museum of Australian Democracy exhibition. This is called It's Beginning to Look a Lot Like Christmas, and then in brackets Ireland, Nauru, PNG. So this work is in response to the boat people issue, and they're all on this Christmassy boat going to Christmas Island. I just think it's ironic that where they're trying to get to is Christmas Island, which for us, Christmas is such a happy sort of celebratory time of year, and the reality is it's a detention centre for these people. So this boat is got the Santas around the base and Santa at the front, and they're all got their Christmas gear because they're heading to Christmas Island, full of hope. So That's that work. This one is St. Kevin 07 and the Real Julia. So I made this work in response to the change of Prime Minister when it happened, and pretty explicit what's going on. I'm not saying what happened was right or wrong. I mean, I'm happy that we have a female Prime Minister. I think that's a good thing, but I was wanting to make the work so that Saint, because he was called Kevin 07 during that, so Saint Kevin 07. I wanted the work to have him stabbed in the back with knives because that was kind of more, really what happened. But visually, that didn't work as an artwork because you didn't see the knives. So then I thought of Saint Sebastian again and the arrows and the martyrdom. And so Kevin was martyred for the good of the Australian Labor Party apparently. So that's how this work came about. So there's Julia in the studio and I'm just sorting out her bow and arrow. And there's Julia with her lovely red hair. And interestingly, the arrows, I got them on eBay, and when it got sent to me, it just said children's toys on the customs ticket, but they were actually short bolt crossbow arrows for actually shooting real arrows, I guess. And so I just thought it was ironic that they're called children's toys. It's quite interesting. And there's Kevin crying his Swarovski crystal tears. So that's St. Kevin 07. This is another in my series of works about the refugee issue, and it's called Leaking Like a Sieve. And sieve is SIEV, which is suspected illegal entry vessel. So that's what they call the boats that come into Australian waters. And I think it's ironic that it's sieve and that I'm just playing on words, I guess, because they are all leaky boats, so it's leaking like a sieve. There's a whole pile of the figurines stuck together. This work's called Tea for Two in Tuvalu. So I was talking about the sea level rises before, and I saw an interesting photograph of the Parliament of the Maldives, and what they did was they got into scuba diving gear and actually had a parliamentary session on the bottom of the ocean outside, off the coast of the Maldives. And they were making the point that, it's not going to be long before they will have to have their parliamentary sessions underwater because the Maldives is sinking, Tuvalu is sinking as well. So this works, I guess, came about from seeing that image of the. It's a great image if you Google it. They're all sitting there and they've got their goggles and they've got their parliamentary documents and they're sitting on the bottom of the ocean. So there's a little guy. I'm mindful of the time. I've got quite a few more slides, but it's about 10:02, so I might go for another 5 minutes and then we'll see. This one's called Smokin', and it's just a little work, but basically they're smoking. And I just find it interesting in popular culture in the last probably couple of years, or at least the last year. Smoking has just crept back into popular culture, and I particularly noticed it in Avatar, the film Avatar, when Sigourney Weaver's character, she'd been in the pod for however many years, and now they were at the planet, and she opened up the pod, and the first thing she did was pull out a cigarette and have a cigarette, and it's just there was this time when you just didn't see cigarettes in films, or except really old films, but now it's starting to creep back. So I guess I'm just kind of acknowledging that, and these figurines are having their little ciggies. This is called Life Was a Riot for Betty and Phil, Betty being Queen Elizabeth and Phil being Prince Philip. So these are this was when the London riots happened, and so these figurines are two riot police. That was a lot of fun to make. This is Venus the hoodie. So not even it's a resin figurine, and the hoodie is an iPhone cover that I got from Borders Bookshop. So and it was just one of those things where the iPhone cover didn't have holes for arms, and Venus doesn't have arms, and I just had her in a studio and I put it on. It just worked really brilliantly. So sometimes artworks can happen very innocently and just from playing around in the studio, and so there she is with her hoodie on. This one's called Keep Young and Beautiful If You Want to Be Loved, and it's a continuation of the nip tuck work. And So this is the three graces. This is how they're represented in art history, but it's a ceramic version. It's probably about 40 centimetres high, I guess. And what I've done is I've made one of the figurines. You can see that's the one here on the left. I've sort of bulked her out and made her a little chubbier than she was with my epoxy resin, and then I've marked her up literally with texture, because that's what happens when women are having their plastic surgery. They literally draw on them and put all these lines everywhere. The one in the middle is wrapped with her bandages and her sunglasses, and there she is all marked up, ready to go.